you ever woken up one morning and discovered that the life you've been pouring yourself into, your ambitions, your goals, even your identity, no longer holds meaning? You peer into the mirror and ask, who am I without this narrative? Nietzsche called this the death of the ego, the great unmasking. He warned, one must pay dearly for immortality. One has to die several times while one is still alive. In that moment, the ego's immortality fractures, and you stand before the ashes of a self you no longer recognize. Imagine a young mountaineer who scaled peaks at 25, chasing the next summit as if every altitude would affirm his worth. Then, a fall breaks his leg, and suddenly the mountains are out of reach. The medals he once hung on his wall feel like rusted relics, reminders of a self forged in adrenaline. He lies in a hospital bed, unable to walk, asking himself, is that mountaintop life the only life worth living? In that void, Nietzsche's words echo. The certain discomfort of being a person, it grows in geometrical progression. The higher the climb, the steeper the fall, and the more acute the void when the ego dissolves. In that dissolution, you may find yourself unmotivated, as though the engine that propelled you has sputtered out. Nietzsche observed, no artist wants to prove anything. He alone knows what he has to express, and he expresses it. When the ego dies, the artist within you no longer feels compelled to prove his worth. Instead, you must discover what you genuinely need to express beyond the applause of an audience or the tally of achievements. Consider a celebrated businessman who defined himself entirely by profit margins and boardroom victories. He built a fortune, earned accolades, and lived in the penthouse until scandal wiped out his empire. In one day, his company collapsed, his bank accounts drained, and the world that once reverenced him turned away. He sat at a cafe, staring at a blank page, because he no longer knew what to write on the tablet of his life. Nietzsche's lesser-known warning comes to mind. You have your way. I have my way. As for the right way, it does not exist. The businessman realized there is no right way to live if the way you chose was your ego's fantasy. He must now chart a new course, not dictated by markets or prestige, but by the silent whisper of a self that survived the collapse. In that abyss, you wrestle with sense of purposelessness. You may feel that motivation has fled, because every goal you once pursued was tethered to an ego that no longer exists. Nietzsche told us, every deep thinker is more afraid of being understood than of being misunderstood. The fear of truly understanding your own abyss can be paralyzing. You'd rather cling to a half-truth than confront the rawness of an empty self. Yet in that fear lies the first spark of rebirth. By risking being understood by yourself, you begin to hear a voice deeper than the noise of ambition. Recall the composer who, at the height of his career, began to lose his hearing. Each symphony he wrote felt like a message trapped in a bottle that could no longer be heard. He described his pain as a gradual disappearance of the sweetest tones, like an irreparable wound to my fate. When his ego as a musical genius was ripped away by deafness, he faced the void of silence. In that void, he composed a final work that transcended notes and became a testament to the human spirit. Nietzsche saw this as the phoenix moment. Through suffering and ego death, a creative force makes us stronger in an entirely new way. Often, after the ego collapses, you find yourself asking, why bother? The recognition that everything you believed in was constructed by the ego can lead to nihilism. Nietzsche anticipated this. If you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss gazes also into you. The abyss of meaninglessness stares back, tempting you to surrender. But he also insisted, that from that abyss, one must forge new values. The void is not the end. It is the raw clay from which a new self can be sculpted. Picture a teacher who defined himself by the strength of his classroom presence. He believed his worth lay in commanding respect, shaping young minds, and never showing vulnerability. Then, an illness steals his voice. He can no longer lecture. His words fall silent. Empty classrooms mock him, and he wonders if he has any left to give. In that moment, he confronts his own projection. He saw teaching as his sole identity, without acknowledging his capacity for empathy and listening. Nietzsche would say the illness forced him to die as a teacher before he could be reborn as a mentor who truly listens. Over time, he learns to guide students not with his voice, but with his presence, rediscovering motivation in the quiet act of bearing witness. After the ego's death, you might drift without direction. A celebrated novelist who once sold millions of copies may find his newest manuscript gathering dust. The characters he once brought to life now seem hollow. He sits at his desk, pen hovering, because the persona of successful writer has evaporated. In that stillness, Nietzsche offers a guiding phrase. In individuals, insanity is rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule. He means that your sense of normalcy, your belonging to a group or a role, can mask the insanity of living without authentic purpose. When you lose that mask, you stand alone, and only then can you see your true reflection. That novelist must now confront his shadow, the envy he felt when peers continued to publish, the guilt he carried for choosing art over stability, the fear that his voice no longer mattered. Nietzsche urged, the man of knowledge must be able not only to love his enemies, but also to hate his friends. In other words, to see who you truly are, you must not only accept the good in yourself, but also acknowledge the ways close relationships have shaped and perhaps limited you. By recognizing how he envied fellow authors and resented his circle for not understanding his new vision, he integrates those shadow elements. Slowly, his pen stirs again, not to recreate past successes, but to explore uncharted facets of the human condition. When your ego dies, the motivations you once clung to, status, approval, comfort, fall away. You discover that those were never real motivations, but mere echoes of societal scripts. Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." That chaos is the turmoil you feel when everything slips away. If you welcome that chaos, you give birth to a dancing star, to a drive that emerges not from external validation, but from the depths of your own unique being. Consider a veteran who defined himself as the protector, the Stoic warrior. He returned from service and expected the world to honor him. When he encountered indifference, his sense of purpose cratered. The medals on his chest felt meaningless without a mission. He fell into a deep valley of despair, convinced that I have nothing left to live for. In that darkness, he encountered Nietzsche's paradox. The advantage of a bad memory is that one enjoys several times the same good things for the first time. He realized that if he could forget his former identity, he might rediscover new joys and purposes. He volunteered to teach combat veterans trauma therapy, using his own shadow, his haunted memories, to guide others. In that rebirth, his motivation was not glory or recognition, but the simple act of service, born from the ruins of his former self. When the ego dissolves, relationships can fray. A father who defined himself by being the provider might lose his job and feel worthless in his own home. His children, used to his confident presence, now see him drifting, unsure. In that moment, He could cling to shame and withdraw, or he could heed Nietzsche's insight. You have your way. I have my way. As for the right way, it does not exist. He learns there is no singular right way to be a father. In his uncertainty, he attempts a new approach, showing vulnerability to his children, sharing with them his fear, inviting them to stand with him rather than under him. The old ego provider dies, and a new father emerges, one who finds motivation not in earnings, but in honest connection. You might wonder, how do I rebuild motivation when the ego is dead? Nietzsche's lesser-cited phrase guides us. There are no beautiful surfaces without a terrible depth. When the ego crumbles, you glimpse the terrible depth of your own unconscious. But that abyss is also where true values take root. In that darkness, small sparks appear, a longing to learn, to create, to heal. They seem insignificant against the chasm, yet they are the seeds of a life lived from the core. Your motivation becomes devotion to those sparks, nurturing them so they ignite into a flame. A scientist who once measured success by published papers might face a grant rejection and feel his entire life's work evaporate. He thought his worth was tethered to citations and conferences, but in that failure, he recalls Nietzsche's cryptic line, "Every deep thinker is more afraid of being understood than of being misunderstood." He realizes that he designed experiments to be understood by peers, not to probe truth. In the aftermath, he begins research on an obscure phenomenon, unfashionable, ignored, because it stirs genuine curiosity within him. His motivation no longer hinges on accolades. It springs from the deep joy of discovery itself, even if no one else comprehends its value. Ultimately, the death of the ego is not a final defeat, but a threshold. Nietzsche wrote, "Become who you are." That mandate does not ask you to resurrect the old self, but to fashion a new one from the bones of the old. Your motivations will shift, from chasing applause to seeking authenticity, from accumulating trophies to cultivating inner wealth, from fleeing fear to embracing it as a teacher. When you wake tomorrow and feel the weight of the void, remember, your ego is dying so that your truest self can be born. Embrace the emptiness, stand in the darkness, and let Nietzsche's lesser-known wisdom guide you. In every deep thinker's fear of true self-understanding, you find courage. In the terrible depth of your being, you discover the terrible beauty of new possibilities. The journey isn't easy, but it is the path of becoming. When you follow it, you will find that motivation is no longer a borrowed engine, but a fire you kindle from within. Your ego's death is an invitation to create your own values, to live not by borrowed scripts, but by the fierce resonance of your inner voice. Nietzsche challenges us. If you stand naked before the abyss and still say yes to existence, you will become stronger than you ever were. And in that strength, you will find motivation that no collapse can ever take away.